All right, it's time for uh, history and health. I'm going to sit down today. Everybody got a hat on? Got my hat on. It's a little beret. They wear 'em maybe in France, maybe off to the side. So you could put black hat if you want, but kind of matched my outfit today, didn't I? All right, we're going to start our history, and we're talking about Ronald Reagan. And I want you to find your history book. We're turning to page 437. We have a map skill paper also today. I'll go over that here in just a few minutes. We're going to talk about Ronald Reagan, and we're going to start the next chapter, a few pages of the next chapter. Well, when we left Ronald Reagan, we saw that he's done quite a few things in his lifetime, including an actor. He was a radio announcer for baseball. But one of the things he always wanted to do is he wanted to get into politics in the government. So he decided he was going to run for the governor of California. And guess what? He won. He served the state of California for 2 terms as the governor. And after that, he was going to retire back to his ranch and just live the rest of his life. But retirement wasn't the answer for him. He wanted to accomplish more for the country that he lived in. He felt like he could do more and benefit our country more. So he decided he was going to run for the president of the United States. And he said the government was too big and the federal government was too big, that states should have more control over the things that they do in certain parts of the government. Now, the first time he tried, he failed. But in 1980, he won the election and he became the 40th president of the United States. And at that time, he was the oldest president to have been elected into that office. Well, I remember this so well. Shortly after he became president, someone shot him as he was getting into a car. I mean, shot him with a gun when he was getting into the car. Of course, he was taken to the hospital very quickly. He recovered quickly. He was back in the White House within 2 weeks. During his time as president, though, he was such a good speaker and a communicator with people that they gave him a title. He was called the Great Communicator. And he just had really good speaking abilities when he was in front of people. He was able to appoint 2 new Supreme Court justices during his presidency, and one of them, very important, Sandra Day O'Connor. She was the first woman to serve on the Supreme Court. And if you remember last year at the Wax Museum, Eva did Sandra Day O'Connor. But she was the first woman to be on the Supreme Court, and Ronald Reagan is the one that appointed her that. In 1983, the National Day of Prayer, he spoke to people who had gathered at the prayer breakfast in Washington. And he said this about the Bible. He said, inside its pages lie all the answers to all the problems that man has ever known. He proclaimed 1983 as the year of the Bible. I don't think they do that today, do you? His faith in God was never hidden from the American people. And he often spoke how much he needed God's help to be a good president. Well, there's one other thing that he is remembered for in his presidency, and that is his stand against communism. Now, communism is a form of government that takes away the freedoms of its people. And one of the greatest symbols of communism during his day was the Berlin Wall. Now, Berlin was a city in Germany, and the World War II had been fought over there, and Berlin had been divided right down the middle, and there was a wall in the middle of the city. And on one side of the wall, it was a free country, a free city, but on the other side of the wall, it was run by communism. So we had a huge contrast. On one side of the wall, people had freedoms. On the other side of the wall, they did not. President Reagan went over to Germany in 1987, and he made a famous speech, and he pointed right at that communist leader at that time. He said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." And after his presidency, after he was done, Ronald Reagan was able to see that wall did come down. We can see on page 439, we can see a picture of the wall, and we can see how they have a big machinery in there tearing the wall down. And there's a piece of the Berlin Wall, they sent it to Reagan's presidential library that's out in California there, and they've decorated it, but that's a piece of the Berlin Wall. But we can see how this wall ran through this city, and it divided the city in half, free on one side and communism on the other side. Young people, communism is a terrible way of life. Your freedoms are taken away. Here in America, we enjoy such great freedoms. The freedom to worship God as we choose. The freedom to go where we want. The freedoms to purchase things that we want. The freedoms to have jobs and to spend our money. And I know we're in a difficult time right now, but we live in the greatest country on this earth. And there are people that are trying to influence our government and wanting to go this way of communism. And this is not the answer. And we can see how communism has destroyed countries through the history of these other countries. And so we really need to pray, and we need to ask God to pick our leaders, choose our leaders that will make the right decisions. And pray for President Trump. He has a lot of things on his shoulders and a lot of decisions to make, and we want to pray for our leaders. And during this time, President Reagan needed the prayers of the American people. But we saw how during his lifetime, during his presidency, this wall came down and Berlin became one city, not one city divided in two, but one city. And we can see on page 440, in 1994, he wrote a very sad letter to the American people. He explained that he had Alzheimer's disease, and it was soon going to cause him to forget things. And he told America, I don't want to keep this as a secret. He wants everybody to know how terrible this disease is. And there was no cure. There is no cure today. And in his letter, he talked about his great love for his country. He says, in closing, let me thank you, the American people, for giving me the great honor of allowing me to serve as your president. When the Lord calls me home, whenever that may be, I will leave with the greatest love for this country of ours and eternal optimism for its future. And he died on June 5th, 2004. He was admired by so many people. He's remembered as the president who stood firmly against communism. Down here on page 441, this I remember this so well. His favorite candy was jelly beans. And he always kept a big jar of them. If you look at the picture, look at the jar of them in the Oval Office. His favorite flavor was licorice. No thank you. 3.5 tons of red, white, and blue jelly beans were served at his inaugural parties. When he became president, they had parties and things right after that, and there were jelly beans at all these parties, red, white, and blue ones. And the amount of jelly beans equaled 7,000 pounds of jelly beans that were at his inaugural parties and dinners. So I thought that was a pretty interesting fact. And there's a big jar of them there. I want you to turn the page. We're going to start chapter 45, Daniel Chappie James. Lily James, she taught class or school, and one day she said, I am going to teach you the 11th commandment. And some little boy says, no, my mama tells me that there's only 10 commandments. God gave us 10 commandments. And she said, well, that's very true, but I have one more every one of you should live by, every one of you. Commandment 11, thou shalt not quit. And Daniel James heard his mother teach this lesson year after year as she taught in her one-room schoolhouse in her backyard. Now, Daniel was born in Pensacola, Florida, and he was the 17th child of Daniel and Lily James. Oh my goodness. He went by the name Chappie. throughout his life. Because Chappie's mother believed that a good education was important, she decided she would teach her children at home. Well, people got word that she was teaching her children at home, and they said, "Can my children come? Can my children come?" And so she had her own little school in her backyard, and they would pay her 25 cents a week to have her teach their children. And if they were too poor to pay, she found a way that they could help out. Well, because they were in Pensacola, Florida, there was then a naval air station. So Chappie always saw planes flying overhead, and he was just thrilled. He was a good student in high school, and he was hoping he could go to college. But his father dies, and now his dream of college is over. But his sister promised to help him. So she made it possible for him to attend the Tuskegee Institute. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? The Tuskegee Institute where he studied physical education, and he played on the football team. Chappie James became a member of the Tuskegee Pilot Training Program. His flight instructor told him, "You were born to fly. You are one of the best pilots I've ever trained." Well, he stayed at Tuskegee. He couldn't get into any other programs right away, so he stayed at Tuskegee, and he was a flight instructor teaching other young men how to fly. And then he was accepted into the U.S. Air Force, and he became a flight instructor for the All-African American 99th Pursuit Squadron during World War II. Very, very important. On the page 446, look at this. Here's a picture of the Tuskegee Pilot Training Program. It was designed to train African American men as pilots. And when World War II began, the Tuskegee Airmen made up several units of all black pilots. These men became an important part of the war, and were especially famous for their strength in the face of danger. If they were assigned to protect a bomber plane, the Tuskegee Airmen stayed with it no matter what. These men were excellent pilots and flew many successful missions. 3 Tuskegee Airmen, including Chappie James, went on to become generals. And we'll continue talking about him, but remember what his mother's 11th commandment was? Thou shalt not quit. And that's a pretty good rule to live by. All right, we do have a map skill sheet today. You're going to see a picture of the United States with little pictures around the country, and up here at the top we have some different places: the Appalachian Mountains, the Atlantic Ocean, a coral reef, Missouri River, Niagara Falls, Ohio River, Pacific Ocean. They want you to see if you can put the correct letter where they have spaces here. You're going to put just the letter A, B, C, and so forth. Some they've already named for you, okay? So try that one out. See if you can get that one. It's not graded for a score, but it's good information. And then in health today, we do have a quiz, okay? No pages today in our health book, but we have quiz 6. And a lot of these things are things that we've talked about, safety rules. And you have your hand signals for your bike, okay? So that can be taken whenever. Send that back in. Tomorrow, I think we have a health test. Yes. Health test tomorrow covers a lot of the same things that we've talked about. Safety rules, okay? Safety rules, things that you should know, things that you've been taught, things that I told you, things that we just need to live by. Safety, safety, safety. All right, guys, good day today. Don't forget to write down my hat. So many of you sent back last week's paper, the green one. Don't forget to fill out. I think this week is yellow. I think. Okay, fill that out. When you get your pack next week, you'll have a prize in there if you filled it out. Okay, so make sure you write down a black, I don't know what you want to call it, black hat. Okay, all right. Love you, miss you. Have a good day today.